Hey everybody, this is Dr. Neil Paulvin, and we're ready to embark on another episode of the Life Optimized podcast, where we help you optimize your love, health, fitness, and business. And we have a great guest today who I've spoken to in the past, but it's been a while. I'm going to introduce Dr. John Sottery, who has a bio as long that it could probably take a half hour to go through here. Some of you may know him as Dr. John from Clubhouse, who became famous on that app. I don't know if he's not even uses the app anymore, but he was a Clubhouse phenom when it was big a couple of years ago. But he's also a huge amount of scientific knowledge and scientific achievements. So, Dr. Sottery, thanks for jumping on with us today. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell everybody about yourself, and then we're going to do some really deep dives in some scientific topics that are becoming really popular and showing some real life application. So thanks for coming on. Introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are and what you've done and what you're doing now.
Sure. I'll try to go really quick. I don't really have my bio up in front of me, so I'm going to give you a real short version. I'm Dr. John. I'm a Ph.D. scientist. I'm not a medical doctor, and I don't provide any medical advice. And I wanted to say that up front. That said, I'm 63 years old. I have young kids. I am incredibly focused on maximizing my health span. And what I'm trying to do is show people that you can be 63, but you can perform like you're 35 if you do the right things for your mitochondrial health, for your cardiovascular health, for the different genes in your body, turning on things that are incredibly protective, turning on processes that drive repair. I did my doctorate in chemistry at Duke. I finished up in 1985, which is probably before many people were born. But I went to work for Procter & Gamble. I led product development teams there. And the last product I worked on did over $500 million in the market. It was a big success. I left P&G. I've started multiple companies. Two of those I've grown, and then to the point where we sold them to larger companies. So the software that we developed, called Ingenuity, is used by Procter & Gamble worldwide and many large companies to build all their formulations. We developed that. But my focus is on how do you maximize health span, how do you slow down damage, and how do you accelerate repair? And I attack the problem like I attack all problems, which is I try to understand it at a fundamental level, which in my world means at a molecular level. And once you understand it, then you can make much better decisions, and it makes life a lot easier. So I left a lot of stuff out of the bio, thankfully for all of us. And let's get into the important stuff. How can Dr. Neil and I help you to add years or decades to your health span? How can we help you feel better, look better? I'm 63, I'll be 64 next year. I don't want to be an old man. I want to be strong. I want to be lean. I want to be out backpacking. I want to be running on the beach. I'm not willing to just surrender to aging normally. And I think, I've spent enough time with Neil on Clubhouse where Neil knows his stuff. And he and I really resonated because, I pride myself on reading the scientific literature and reading 20 articles and piecing it together. I don't rely on repeating something I've heard from someone else. I always want to go back to primary sources. And if I don't have a molecular understanding, I'm not comfortable. So that was a long sentence, Neil. I'm going to bring it back to you and we get rolling, man.
For anybody who doesn't believe that John's into this, I don't know if his Clubhouse picture's on the website now, but John does what he speaks about. I mean, he looks like he's 30 years old in his pictures, and he practices what he preaches. So what's great, what you mentioned, I mean, in terms of now, it used to be called, people used to throw terms around like biohacking and kind of longevity. And now we're finding is as what you mentioned, the data is now catching up in terms of we can do things in actuality in real life to maximize our health span, to be healthier. And you mentioned a couple of times already, and right now you have to start with the mitochondria. And that leads in terms of doing things to optimize your mitochondria, and we'll kind of go through that, things like red light and certain supplements.
Sure.
It goes to how the cell itself, in terms of things like autophagy and mitophagy, which is how the mitochondria breaks down, is important. So we're going to go through the mitochondria, how that's kind of becoming almost the core of any health span conversation. I mean, you want to talk about anything from NED or NRF2 or any half the supplements out there now, or vitamins are targeting the mitochondria. And then there's also that lifestyle component. You can take it's the opposite, where you can take, and I know you believe in that too, in terms of the way you practice life, where if you don't have that foundation, you can take all the supplements that are out there that people are talking about all over the place, and it's only going to go so far. So let's get back to, in terms of what the importance of making sure that your mitochondria is healthy. So in terms of what you're looking at now, what do you find most important for yourself? And I know you have clients now or patients, in terms of the starting point and in terms of approaching and optimizing the mitochondrial health.
Sure. I'll take 60 seconds and just talk about mitochondria, and then we'll get into that a little bit, Neil. Your mitochondria are the battery chargers in your cells. And the batteries are the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate. And the job of the mitochondria, your food has the electrons. You breathe in, you eat food, you breathe in oxygen. Oxygen wants the electrons. The electrons flow from the food to the oxygen. And when they do that, they pump protons. Think of it like a hydroelectric dam. They pump protons up behind the dam. And then those protons flow through a turbine, and it's called ATP synthase. And it spins at 9,000 RPM. So it's like a Ferrari 458. It spins at 9,000 RPM. And every time it spins, it charges up 3 batteries. And it changes them from ADP to ATP. So that was for the people that are more, nerdy, or that want to know the details. That's how it's all supposed to work. If, however, those electrons don't flow all the way through the electron transport chain, if they leak out part of the way there, like a furnace, those are sparks. And those sparks can cause incredible damage to your mitochondria. And your mitochondria have their own hard drive. They have their own DNA. The mitochondrial DNA is circular, whereas your DNA is a double helix. And interestingly, we're all descendants apparently from one woman in Africa millions of years ago. So we're all related because we all have the same mitochondrial DNA. You can track that if you want to look that up. So when you look at a young kid, when I look at my young son, he can fly. He never gets tired. He can race around. If I say, go get something upstairs, he'll race up and get it, come back. If I say, oh, get me this, he'll race up and get it again. The biggest difference between someone that's 10 years old and someone that's 60 years old is that their mitochondrial function, their battery chargers, don't work as well. That's the big thing. And so I've tried to understand what damages mitochondria, number one, because I don't want to do that. And number two, what can I do to get rid of the damaged mitochondria and create new ones from the ones that are undamaged? So to me, if you're in your 30s, because no one cares about their health in their 20s, if you're in your 30s and more likely in your early 40s, you want to protect your mitochondria, because when they start to fail, you're going to get chronic disease. You're going to have no energy. Your skin's going to look worse. Everything in your body is going to work more poorly because everything runs on ATP. You can't think a thought. You can't move your finger. You can't have your heartbeat. Nothing works without ATP. And that's why cyanide is a toxin, because cyanide shuts down ATP production in your mitochondria, and in 15 seconds, you're dead. And so my number one thing I would say to people up front is a simple thing, and you've heard it before, but you maybe didn't understand why. You don't want to eat 3 hours before you go to bed, because you're going to eat all that food. The body can store the fat, but the carbohydrate, it can store a little bit as glycogen, but the carbohydrate's going to be there, and it's going to feed into that electron transport chain. Those electrons are going to feed in. when you go to bed and you stop, there's very low energy demands, not zero, but much lower. If those electron transport chains back up, some of those electrons are going to leak out as sparks, and they're going to create oxygen-free radicals. And those are going to ravage your battery chargers, your mitochondria. So I know a lot of years people told me, don't eat before you go to bed, but I'd have a slice of pizza and go to bed, whatever. When I figured that out, I know 10 or 12 years ago, I was like, oh my God, I really need to start doing that. And that's something that I've done for the last 10 or 12 years, and it's made a huge difference. So you don't want to damage your mitochondria, because when those chains back up, like an electrical wire, if you've charged up all your ADP, then there's no place for those electrons to go except to leak out of the chain and to create these oxygen-free radicals. So you don't want to do that. So, but what about the mitochondria? What about the battery chargers you have that are already defective? What can we do to get rid of those? And that's a kind of a cool thing. It's really a two-part process. First thing you need to do is you need to push your mitochondria hard, where they all have to run full blast. How can you do that? You jump into an ice bath and your body goes, oh my God, we're freezing to death. And all your mitochondria run all out. Or you do some high intensity training and you really push it for a 60-second interval. Or maybe you sit in the sauna and you're pushing your mitochondria because now your body has to deal with that thermal stress. But when you do that and they all run full blast, the body looks around at those trillions and trillions of furnaces, and it spots the ones that are leaking free radicals. It sees the ones that are leaking sparks, and it tags those. So it puts a little Post-it note on them and tags them and says, the next time we shut down the factory, we're going to recycle all of these defective mitochondria. And that's step two is when you do intermittent fasting, or when you take resveratrol, or when you take spermidine, or you consume foods that have spermidine, you're going to help the body trigger autophagy, the recycling process. I just leave it at that. We'll get into it more later. But the body is smart, and it will look around and it will only recycle the mitochondria that are defective. And that's called mitophagy, as Neil alluded to earlier. And you want to get rid of them. Why? Number one, they're not working well. So that's a big problem. But number two, mitochondria are created through division. It's like having a little bacterial cell in your cell, and they actually divide. And so if you have defective mitochondrial DNA and you let it divide, then 1 becomes 2, which becomes 4. And you know how geometric progressions work. So you have to get rid of them, multiple times a week, because you don't want them to build up. You want all your mitochondria to be young and pristine with perfect hard drives. You don't want those ones with defective hard drives to reproduce. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Neil, if you want to ask any drill down questions. But that's one of the reasons why autophagy and mitophagy are so incredibly valuable, is because you have a chance to get rid of them. But if you never push your mitochondria, then they never get tagged, and therefore you're not going to get rid of, all those defective, all those defective mitochondria. No, so Neil, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, we know. Yeah, autophagy is. I'm at both the terms of if you don't remove those dysfunctional cells or dysfunctional mitochondria, it's not only going to make you not work as well and lead to, like you mentioned, reactive species. You're going to lead potentially to Alzheimer's and dementia, and there's even a link now to diabetes and down the line. So you brought up, and we're going to go probably a little deeper dive in a little bit. When you say intermittent fasting, that has become kind of a big generalized term. I mean, that could mean one thing to you, and then somebody said, well, I didn't eat breakfast this morning. I intermittent fasted, which is not true. So when you're communicating that to somebody, from what I know, what I've read, I know it's usually 18, 24 hours in theory is when autophagy is going to happen with fasting. But what are you looking for in terms of when you're fasting to initiate autophagy?
Yeah. there's a lot of, one of my favorite research groups in terms of autophagy is Dr. Guido Kromer, who's in Paris, and they've done some spectacular work, and he's an incredibly articulate researcher. If you get a chance, watch some of his stuff on YouTube. Great guy and an amazing researcher. I guess when I look at, tell me, go back. I go back to the question again, because I was.
What are you looking for if you're advising yourself, looking for yourself or somebody else? What hour? What time?
Oh, the number of hours. Yeah.
Because
So, I almost every day have a 16-hour fast. Some days I have a 20-hour fast. I'm in a family. I eat with my family. I have kids. It's not always easy, but it's really easy for me to avoid breakfast. So here's the key thing in my mind, and some people will argue, and that is, I wake up, I try to finish my dinner by 7 p.m. And earlier is better. At 7 a.m., 12 hours later, the body has used up all the glycogen. So what's going to trigger autophagy is when there's no fuel, when there's no glucose, and when there's no amino acids present. And that's going to bring down mTOR, and you're going to likely turn on autophagy. It's more complicated than that. I hear people talk about autophagy like it's a switch that's either on or off. And I don't see it that way. I believe that you always have a baseline level of autophagy running. However, when you bring down mTOR, you turn it up. So I would say that at 12 hours, maybe you're starting to turn the knob just a little bit. And then when you get to 16 hours, you've turned it up a little bit more. Now, it may take 24 or 48 hours to get it so it's running on maximal effect, because the body's not only doing the recycling to get rid of the misfolded proteins in your brain and the defective mitochondria, it's doing it because the cells need energy. And when they break down these macromolecules, they can take the components, release them to the cell, and use them as fuel. So part of the reason why your body does autophagy is because it says, I'm starving and I need fuel. And so I'm going to use the cellular components that are not critical right now. It would be like if your power went off in your house and your heat went off, and you look around your house and say, I'm going to light the fireplace. I need some alternate fuel. And you see, I have piles of newspapers and piles of magazines and piles of junk that I need to get rid of. The body's going to recycle those. And a lot of that's going to get burned. Some of it's going to be recycled to build things, but a lot of it's going to get burned. And so I look at autophagy as a knob that after 12 hours, it's probably starting to bump up a little bit. At 16 hours, it's coming up some more. But it may take 24, 36, 48 hours or more to really get to the maximum level. We don't have great biomarkers for autophagy right now, but Dr. Kromer's group has done some beautiful work looking at how LC3 goes from being diffuse to being in little dots across the cell. And they've actually done work with using fluorescent labels, and they can actually quantify that. So I would think of it as a knob and not a switch, and that at 12 hours, you're just starting to ramp up. And, to get to the maximum, you're probably looking at a 2-day fast. But in between those two, you're going to get more autophagy by not eating, by letting it run. Let me turn it back to you, Neil, and see if you have any, follow-ups and like that.
Yeah, I like that philosophy and that explanation that it's not like 0 or 60. There's gradations in there in terms of what you're getting. But yes, there's a like you really want to get to that, to get the max autophagy. It's going to be about, again, 2 days or so. So we're going to, again, we want to make sure your mitochondria is working optimally. And then there's things that we can definitely do. You mentioned reactive oxygen species, which you need to make things run to a certain extent in your mitochondria, and then they overwhelm. So we want to find things out that are find and use things that are going to extinguish that spark when the spark becomes too hot, for lack of a real, to this analogy here. So I know you're into that, you have several recommendations. So when we're looking into trying to contain those reactive species, what are you advising people to do? What do you do for yourself?
Sure, sure. And you're right. If you quench all the free radicals, if you have fire extinguishers everywhere and you quench all the free radicals, the body is never going to see the sparks because you put them all out. And therefore, for instance, when I work out hard, Neil, I don't take any antioxidants that day. And generally, I try to not take them the day before, because you won't get the exercise, the full exercise benefits, because the reactive oxygen species that are created are part of the response that triggers the repair, that triggers you building more muscle, that triggers you getting stronger to make more mitochondria. I don't want to crush the signal. Now, that being said, I don't want the fire to burn out of control. So free radicals are interesting. It just means you have a molecule that has an unpaired electron. And I like to, I think of the hydroxyl radical as the Mr. T of free radicals, which of course you have to be old enough to have seen Rocky III. But that hydroxyl radical, when it's created, is so reactive. It's probably one of the most reactive species in the universe. It will, when it hits your DNA, it will ravage it. It will rip an electron off of it. You may get a strand break or a double strand break. When it hits your lipid membranes, it will create a free radical chain. And it doesn't just kill one thing. When you oxidize one lipid in the cell membrane, it's like lighting one tree on fire. That tree lights the next tree on fire. It rips an electron off the next thing, which continues through, and you may kill 100 lipids with that electron, where it's oxidizing the next thing to get an electron, and then that continues. That's called free radical propagation. And then finally, in the cell membrane, maybe you have some alpha or gamma tocopherol, and it hands an electron over to that last molecule, and it quenches it. So antioxidants are just molecules that can give up an electron without themselves becoming a free radical. So whether we're talking about vitamin C or vitamin E or the different polyphenols, I think, and I want to make sure we touch on this. There's a ton of things that people call antioxidants that are antioxidants. They can do that. But I think the reason why they're healthy is not because they can quench free radicals. It's because they have epigenetic effects. They turn on incredibly beneficial genes in your body. So I think their epigenetic effects are much more important than their ability to quench free radicals. So, so many things that are healthy, people are like, oh my God, it's an antioxidant. Yes, that's true. But I don't think that's the key mode of action for some of the compounds that are in blueberries, or some of the compounds that are in coffee, or, on and on, or some of the compounds in broccoli and so on. So I want to get that one out up front. But when an antioxidant attacks a free radical, it's like a Patriot missile. One free radical, one antioxidant, it's destroyed, and vitamin C is consumed, or alpha tocopherol is consumed in the process and would have to be regenerated. That's fine, and that works. But I want to turn on I call it my laser-based air defense system, which is I want to turn on a system that can kill off 5 or 10 billion free radicals every single second and does not get worn out. So I want to turn on superoxide dismutase. I want to turn on the genes that make catalase. I want to turn on all these antioxidant enzymes. And to me, and I'm sure to you as well, the best way to do that is to activate this NRF2 pathway. And for anyone that's listening, if you're not familiar with NRF2, nuclear regulatory factor 2, Google it, watch some things on this, because this is critical. And it's the reason why broccoli sprouts are so healthy. Because when you chew up broccoli sprouts, you produce something called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is a beautiful activator of NRF2. Curcumin also activates NRF2. Resveratrol, the EGCG in green tea, Ficitin, moringa, all these things can really turn up NRF2. And if you're going to do that, the one hack is you probably only have to do it every 2 days, because when you create the air defense system, it stays around for a couple of days, maybe 2 to 3 days. So if you are taking a supplement to activate NRF2, you might be able to do it every other day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, instead of doing it every day. So just another thing I wanted to put out there. So if you look into NRF2, I think your mind will be blown, because when you don't run it, you're creating incredible damage across your entire body, and you're increasing your risk of, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cardiovascular disease, mitochondrial dysfunction, on and on and on, because these are the machines. Picture catalase as a machine that can destroy billions of hydrogen peroxide per second. And you're like, hydrogen peroxide, that doesn't sound so bad, John. Well, if hydrogen peroxide's around and you have any free iron, that's how you make hydroxyl radicals. It's called the Fenton reaction. And hydroxyl radicals ravage your body. So I do things to make sure that I don't have free iron around. I keep my blood ferritin levels at the bottom of the range, and I've done that for the last 30 years. I've given 9.25 gallons of blood to the Red Cross. I think I'm their #1 guy in Charleston. They call me every 56 days. But you need to turn on NRF2, and you need to help your body create these antioxidant enzymes that are incredibly valuable. And here's the bonus points. They also turn on what are called phase 2 detoxification enzymes. And again, I know that's gibberish to everybody, but
not as much anymore. I have patients come to me and telling me this stuff, like asking about these things now. It's great, but yeah, explain it though.
So let's just say you fly and you're visiting China, and you go to one of the manufacturing centers, and you think to yourself, wow, this air is just not good. And it could be any place that has, heavy manufacturing. And in the air, there's some benzene. Benzene is a top 100 carcinogen. There are other carcinogens. Your body has a system to get rid of those, this phase 2 detox system. Beautifully, things like sulforaphane and other things that activate NRF2, they also turn on those phase 2 detoxification enzymes. So there was a study done a few years back in China where they followed, I don't remember, I don't have the details in front of me, but hundreds of people. And one group, they gave them a broccoli drink every morning to drink, to give them sulforaphane to turn on NRF2. And the other group didn't get it. And then they measured the amount of benzene in their blood. And as the levels of pollution went up and down, the benzene went up and down. But the group that didn't get it was up here and was always much higher. The group that did get it had 50 or 60% less benzene in their blood. So if you have a carcinogen, you want to get rid of it before it initiates cancer. So turning on those phase 2 detoxification enzymes may protect you from getting cancer. You can't avoid all carcinogens. What you can do is strengthen your body so that it can handle them. And that's what turning on NRF2 does. So Neil, I'm going to bring it back to you again. Then.
There is a masterclass in terms of antioxidants and reactive oxygen species. So I want to highlight a couple of things that we mentioned there. Number one, it's, again, for some reason now in our supplement culture, everybody's like, I have to have antioxidants. I need my glutathione. I need this. I need that. We know that if taking prolonged and daily antioxidants does decrease muscle building and athletic performance. That's been proven time after time after time. So what Dr. John is saying is you need your antioxidants, but it's not something that needs to protect in terms of supplements, at least, be part of your daily routine. You can add it in multiple times a week, but not daily. If you're getting it from food, which I'm going to go back to in a second, that's a little bit of a different ballgame a little bit. You want to get those nutrients in your food, but you don't need to add it with supplements. The second thing I want to highlight, yes, Nerf2, in terms of general health, has become one of the best, probably the best antioxidant in terms of what it does. You can get it from broccoli, you can get it from supplements. It's something you definitely should be aware of and looking into, making sure you're doing something in terms of supplementation to activate your Nerf2 pathway. And what we're going to go through as we go through the rest of the podcast here, what you want to try to pick up is there's different things that you can do from different buckets. You want to have some lifestyle changes, be it sauna or cold immersion. You want to do something for your antioxidants. It doesn't have to be all 7 things that we mentioned. We're going to talk about potentially doing things like red light to boost your cytochrome and doing other things. We're going to talk about insulin. If you kind of do one from column A, a couple from column B, it's not, I just need a bunch of things from column B and I'm going to be perfect. More is not better, and what we're talking about is having a kind of a comprehensive approach. But I mean, again, everything else, I totally agree with everything you're saying. And again, Nerf2 general health, and now unfortunately in terms of illness, is coming out. And again, what I love about, you've been talking about this for years now, is we're seeing the paradigm kind of switch a little bit. It used to be, okay, we're only going to treat people when they're sick and then work backwards and try to treat them. Now we're trying to not have, like you mentioned, things you can do for cancer and other illnesses, diabetes, and so on. If you can maintain your health span, we hopefully don't get to that later stage. So I know it's something that you've talked about before, and you brought up a couple of times already. A lot of these things you can get from food. Certain ones you can get very easily from food. Sulforaphane could be one of them. And you also brought up spermidine in terms of autophagy. And that one, you better be eating a lot of natto and a lot of other things to get some of the levels that the studies are showing. So, so in terms of, do you advise for yourself and other people in terms of get as much as you can from food first and then supplement what you're not getting? I mean, that tends to be my approach as well, but it's, if we can make it work.
Well, here's the thing, Neil. If you look at the scientists from 1900 today, we go 120 plus years in the future. I don't know how I can say this politely. We think they were fools because they didn't understand anything. And if you look at this, the scientists in the 1900s thought they had it all figured out, but they looked at the scientists from 100 years before them and said they knew nothing. And that's always the case. And I know, it's 2022 right now. I know in 15 years, they're going to look back and say, oh my God, those people, they didn't know anything, meaning we don't understand everything. The magic of getting it from food is that there oftentimes are other things that are critical, other cofactors, other bioflavonoids, other things that are critical to its benefit that you would get in the orange peel. But if you just take pure ascorbic acid, vitamin C, you wouldn't get. So getting nutrients from food, I think, is critical. Now, that being said, I probably don't eat broccoli twice a week. I want my wife to make it, but she's just not into it. And the kids are not into it. So it's not high on the thing. So I'll spin out to the store and I'll buy a bunch of broccoli and then I'll whip it up and, crush some fresh garlic and some olive oil and make it taste good or whatever. I have a hack for you on broccoli because most people, when they eat broccoli, they get very little sulforaphane. And the reason is that broccoli itself doesn't have sulforaphane. It has a precursor called glucoraphanin in one compartment. And then in a separate compartment, it has an enzyme called myrosinase. And it's only when you chew it up and those two come together that you produce the sulforaphane. So you're thinking, okay, that's fine. I chew my broccoli. But when you cook the broccoli, when you steam it for 7 minutes, you kill the enzyme, you kill the myrosinase. So you're going to get 95% less sulforaphane if you cook it. Now, I don't like the taste of raw broccoli, partly because you're tasting the sulforaphane. But if you cook the broccoli, steam it, and then after you steam it, you go on Amazon and you buy, and I don't have any Amazon connection, but you buy for $6 a little bag of mustard seeds, whole mustard seeds. So I take a teaspoon and I'll take a half a teaspoon of mustard seeds and either sprinkle it on my broccoli or put it in my mouth and crunch it up. And you know the seeds are good because if you crunch them up, it's not going to be hot initially, but then over time, it's going to start getting hot in your mouth because the myrosinase is activating compounds that are giving you that effect. If you add back that enzyme from the mustard seeds to the cooked broccoli, you can increase by 10 or 20-fold the amount of sulforaphane that you get. Now, the other approach, if people that are hardcore, but I think only 1 person of 500 will do this, is you grow or you buy broccoli sprouts and you eat those and you do those raw. So I have friends of mine, I have them putting broccoli sprouts in their smoothies to cover up the taste because most people don't love that taste. That works as well. The other thing is if you want to make broccoli soup, put it in your Vitamix with a couple ice cubes and blend it. And then let it sit for a couple hours and then make the soup. Because once the glucoraphanin has been converted to sulforaphane, it doesn't matter if you heat it up now. So for the kids, I make, oh, it's Daddy's super powered green soup. And it's really a broccoli soup with a bunch of other things in it so they don't taste the broccoli. But I'll always let it sit for a couple hours to massively increase the amount of sulforaphane that you get. Now, that being said, I take probably 3 days a week a supplement that has both the glucoraphanin and the myrosinase in it, and then it produces that, in my body, it produces a sulforaphane because I'm trying to push the envelope. I want to build a race car, so I want to really push it. So I do that on top of it. But there are other things in the broccoli that are also very helpful in terms of cancer prevention and other health benefits, many of which we haven't learned yet. So I would definitely say the food is first, but then I add in to bump it up with supplements maybe every other day because I really want to push the envelope a little bit. So I'm gonna bring it back to you again.
That's exactly. I mean, food is first because it's going to be the most pure form. You're going to get the best effects with it. And again, if it's good quality supplement, if it's good quality food, organic, and then you supplement as you need to is the way that I believe in as well. And then we've mentioned spermidine kind of all over. I want to do a dive because I get so many questions about it now. In terms of, you mentioned, the main effect or the main thing it's known for is that it does induce autophagy, which we talked about previously, but has a lot of other benefits. I know you're a fan of both getting it in terms of getting from food and potentially in supplementation. So explain to people why they should be loving some spermidine as well with their broccoli. So have some natto and some broccoli and they're good to go.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And that's one of the things that I teach people is I have my 15-minute longevity lunch to give people high levels of spermidine and to give people another molecule that we'll get into a little bit later. So you want to turn on autophagy. And there are some things that you can do to do that, not just fasting. Fasting is one of the knobs that you can turn to turn up autophagy. Exercise also turns up autophagy. And I think a lot of the benefits that you get from exercise come from autophagy. And I believe there are studies that show if you block autophagy after exercise, you don't get nearly the benefits. You lose the majority or nearly all of the exercise benefits if you block autophagy. So intermittent fasting or fasting and exercise are huge. Resveratrol also turns up autophagy. So people talked about resveratrol because of what it does to the sirtuins. Okay, that's a good point, but it's also impacting autophagy. And then spermidine is a key molecule. Here's what grabbed me on spermidine. studies that were done on centenarians, and they looked at normal individuals, and then they looked at centenarians. And normal individuals, when they're young, had very high levels of spermidine. You make it in your cells and you consume it in food, and you make some in your gut. So you have multiple sources of it. The interesting thing is, when they were young, everyone has high levels. But when you get to 40, the spermidine levels start dropping in most people, but they don't drop in centenarians. And then when you get to 80 or 90 or 95, they've dropped massively in most people, but not in centenarians. And it wasn't just the spermidine levels, it was the heart disease, there were all these other effects that went along with that. So I thought, this is incredible. I did a whole, hour talk on that. I showed the data. It just blew my mind. So I definitely want to be in the group that has more spermidine. There's work out now because a lot of people are dealing with residual problems from their COVID infections or maybe from their vaccinations, who knows. It turns out that the SARS-CoV-2 virus has the ability to turn down spermidine production in the cell. So maybe it becomes even more critical for those folks to restore that spermidine by choosing the right foods and like that. When I look at the spermidine supplements, and I'm not saying anything bad about any of the supplements, they're good, but I go back to my Procter & Gamble days, and I'm always saying, how much do I get and how much does it cost? So, it's kind of the bang for the buck kind of deal. And, a lot of spermidine supplements might give you 1 milligram, but if I can easily eat a quarter pound of peas, 110 grams of peas. And if I can get 6 or 7 milligrams of spermidine just by getting frozen peas and steaming them up and throwing them in as a side dish, that to me is more attractive. If I can get it from, mushrooms, I can get it from wheat germ, I can get it from natto. There's some great sources out there. The critical thing is not necessarily to pick the one that has the most, but pick the one that will give you a decent amount in something that you can do for the rest of your life. So my 15-minute longevity lunch is pea soup. I do pea soup, but then I saute up some mushrooms because I don't, I want other things that are in the mushrooms beyond the spermidine to, improve my situation on that front as well. So the molecule I'm alluding to is called ergothioneine, and it's a fascinating molecule, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. I remember I mentioned it on Clubhouse, a year and a half ago. Everyone was like, "Huh? What? What's that, John?" And now there's actually people selling supplements now that have ergothioneine. When I talked about it, it costs $90 a month to supplement and get 5 milligrams of ergothioneine a day. So I didn't supplement. Now there are supplements that cost, $15 a month where you can get 5 milligrams a day. So now I get it from the mushrooms, but I also get it from the supplement because I want more ergothioneine. And I have a medical hypothesis about how mushrooms may lower the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. And it comes back to ergothioneine and what's happening on a molecular basis. I don't, you and I can talk about it after.
We can go. Yeah, I was going to lead right into ergothioneine anyway. So
great.
Well, definitely want to get into that in a second. So just to kind of finish up, spermidine is the main things that we look at. You can definitely get it from food. There's now supplements that have learned that you can't. What the studies are showing, it's anywhere between 3 to 10 milligrams of spermidine are the ones that really bring on the benefits of it. So the supplement companies have upped the dose. It is pretty expensive. So if you have the time to get it from peas or beans or natto, that is the easiest way to do it. Again, all these supplements can get very expensive very quickly at this point, especially if you're getting the high quality things. Spermidine has been shown it can help heal the gut lining. We know that it may help in terms of crossing the blood-brain barrier and helping anti-inflammatory in terms of the brain. It may have some Alzheimer's preventative effects. So spermidine it's anti-inflammatory. I use it in a lot of my joint, like my arthritis patients. So it has a lot of benefits. Get it from food if possible. If you are going to supplement, you usually want to get it at a higher dose. If you're going to do the 1 milligram,
Yeah,
it's not really as beneficial for what you pay for it, like Dr. John says. One of the points about spermidine, we'll hop back onto the mushrooms, are they have gluten. If you have celiac disease or really sensitive to gluten, you want to get a gluten-free or get it from a gluten-free source, no matter where you're getting it from.
you're saying instead of like getting it from a wheat germ capsule,
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
exactly,
Yeah. And yeah,
there's
good.
a gluten-free supplement. You can get it from beans and nuts or whatever. It doesn't set you off either. So, I mean, mushrooms, I think everybody should be eating mushrooms. I mean, there's so many, everything from all the things that we know there in terms of the mushrooms now, in terms of the benefits between immune and anti-inflammatory and mood and so on and so forth. But
And one last thing on spermidine, there's some good science around the fact that spermidine seems to reduce colon cancer. And given that maybe 7% of all cancer deaths are colon cancer, and it's a pretty brutal disease, anything you can do to avoid colon cancer is a good thing as well. So I've seen papers there, and I've also seen work that says that it helps with osteoporosis. So that women that have osteoporosis, the body actually turns up some of the genes to try to make more spermidine because it needs it. So that's pretty preliminary, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing molecule. I'm sure the pharmaceutical companies are working on spermidine analogs. They don't have to work any better, but if they're unique, then they can patent them. They can spend the $500 million to do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinicals. They can get a new drug application, and then they can charge you $150 or $200 a month for the rest of your life to take it. I always prefer, if I can, to find natural molecules that give the benefit that we've been consuming for hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of years that have been demonstrated to be healthy. That's my first choice, because when you make a pharmaceutical, sometimes you have unintended consequences from it. And so it may not, it may give you the effect that you want, but you may get some negative effects as well. So,
we're seeing that whole process as we speak. We're seeing that process going with some of the NAD supplements, where there's the pharmaceutical companies are making a pharmaceutical component of NMN. So they're trying to knock out all the supplement companies, and this is going to become. We're going to see this a lot more and more as they realize that supplements actually have value, and there's not just ridiculous voodoo science. But on to ergothioneine. So discuss what the benefits are, why people should be looking for it, eating their mushrooms if they can supplement it. Go for it. Why should they do that?
Ergothioneine is actually an amino acid, and you find it, I don't know if exclusively, but primarily in mushrooms. So you're thinking, okay, that's nice. You've never heard of it. It's not part of my DNA. What's the body use it for? So when you eat something that has ergothioneine, the body has a transporter just for that amino acid. So it grabs all of it out of your gut. Unlike most drugs that are immediately metabolized in the liver and then excreted by your body, the body holds on to all the ergothioneine. And then here's how I picture ergothioneine. It is a molecule that the body can use intelligently. So if you have a cell and the cell is undergoing oxidative attack, it can turn on the genes, not to make ergothioneine, but to make the transporter. And so it makes that transporter and it puts it on the cell. The body is circulating the ergothioneine in your blood. The cells that need it, the ones that are on fire, put it out. So in your garage, maybe if there's a fire in your fuse box, you want to put it out. But if there's a fire inside the cylinders that you need for the car to run, you don't want to go dumping water into the cylinders of your car. So the cells can selectively bring it in to put it out. And what's interesting is it's also an incredible copper chelator. And you're thinking, well, what's the big deal about copper? Free copper in the body is like free gasoline in your garage. It's dangerous as hell. You need to keep copper inside a safety gas can. You need to keep it inside a protein called ceruloplasmin because that keeps it safe, and that's how you transport it through the body. And there was some work that came out of Europe, and I reached out to one of the researchers and said, can you send me the full study? Because all of the abstract was online, and she did. And I did a whole talk on this, but it turns out that the number one predictor in all these people that had mild cognitive impairment, would they progress to have Alzheimer's or not? And you think, well, what's their, do they have APOE4? Are they a 4-4 or a 3-4, whatever? Do they have high cholesterol? Do they have all these other things that are known to be negatives for Alzheimer's? And out of the list of 9 or 10 things that they looked at, the number one thing was having significant levels of unbound copper. Now, copper is not evil. Without copper, you can't make collagen. Without copper, you can't make myelin sheaths, which is the insulation on your nerves. So you need copper. It's fundamental to life. Without copper, you can't absorb iron and you can't move iron along because copper is beautiful about being able to transfer electrons back and forth to things. But when you have free copper in your brain, your risk of Alzheimer's goes wild. So the way they do that is they look at the serum copper, and then they look at the amount of ceruloplasmin in there, and they know the stoichiometry, meaning how much copper is inside the gas can and how much of it is free. And that was the number one factor that determined if people went from mild cognitive impairment to full-blown Alzheimer's. And that blew my mind because I had never heard anybody talking about it. And then if you look, the Japanese have done studies, and they've shown, if you look at Japanese and you pick people that eat a lot of mushrooms and you pick people that eat many fewer mushrooms, the people that eat a lot of mushrooms get far less cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's. Guess what? Mushrooms are giving them a high level of ergothioneine. The body puts it in the blood. If the cells in the brain are under attack, maybe because there's free copper there catalyzing reactions, the cell can turn on the transporter and it can pull in the ergothioneine, and ergothioneine chelates copper and it makes it catalytically inactive. You're like, okay, John, talk English. It means that it's inside the gas can. It can no longer do damage. Iron and copper cause problems because they are redox active. They transfer electrons readily. Sorry, I can't speak. I'm fasting, by the way.
Brain's working on the ketones now.
I need more beta hydroxybutyrate to kick in here. But if a cell in your brain is under attack and it can pull in some ergothioneine, it can selectively chelate the copper there. Now, they have tried to give people that have mild cognitive impairment copper chelators, but that's a dumb chelator. That chelates copper everywhere. And that's like something that's going to get rid of all the gasoline. So now you don't have any gas for your car and the car doesn't run. It has to be intelligent. It has to be on a cell-by-cell basis where the cell can decide if it's under attack, can turn on the transporter and pull the copper in. And so that's my medical hypothesis. I haven't submitted it. I've been pretty busy, but that copper is a key player in a significant fraction of Alzheimer's. And I want to just digress for 1 second because there's a key point, Neil. There are hundreds of people that are listening that are looking for that one thing, that one magic bullet. And they watch the Billy Crystal movie where he went out west and they're looking for that one thing. And I guess what I would say is, I think that's a mistake. The metaphor should be, you're building a race car. Is horsepower important? Yes. Is mitochondrial function important? Yes. Is it the whole story? No. Is chronic inflammation important? Yes. Is it the whole story? No. The biggest problem that we have is, if you want to be a top scientist in this world, you pick a narrow area, vitamin K2, or you pick a narrow area about autophagy or about spermidine, and you go 10 miles deep in that area. But you tend to think that's the whole world because that's your area and you know it and you know it completely. You need to change the model in your mind that you're building a race car and that you have to optimize multiple systems. Occasionally, if you have a race car where the aerodynamics and the suspension and the braking and the handling are all really good, and you turn up the horsepower, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Or if you have if you make a soup and the soup has no salt, and you go along and then you add a couple teaspoons of salt, you're like, oh my God, salt is it. It's the answer. So the two models I'd say is your body is your recipe. If somebody else added salt to their recipe and it had a massive improvement, that's right. And that's right for their recipe. If you're exactly like them, it may be the case for you too, but it could have no effect, or it may actually make you feel worse. So many people in the world figure out what worked for them, what were their weak links, and then something that made a big change. To them, it's a magic bullet. And that's the problem with most of the books that are written in health, is they tend to be on a single subject. I don't think it's the researcher. I think it's the publisher. The publisher says it's got to be just about gluten. It's got to just be about uric acid. It's got to just be about, because people can't handle it. But change your viewpoint, and that is that your health, that Y, is a function of 100 different X's. In your recipe, a couple of those are your weak links. When you fix those weak links, you'll get a huge effect. You'll think this is the best thing since sliced bread. So that's why measuring critical biomarkers, getting a look inside your specific biochemistry, knowing what your weak links are, and then targeting those first, and then going back, not just saying, you always want to say, do I feel better? But you want to go back. Maybe you measured 80 biomarkers. You want to go back and measure those 3 biomarkers again to see if what you're doing is working for you. Because you may not have the right bugs in your gut to do a conversion. So it doesn't work for you. You have to change course. That's why I'm pretty strong on the supplements that I take, because I measure 80 or 90 biomarkers every year. And I have my data. Now, this is where I'm like a super nerd, but I have my data plotted since 2008. And every time I make a significant change to my supplements or my diet, I look at all these parameters and I can see, because the body is so complicated. You may help 3 things, but you may hurt something else. So copper is not good or bad. Iron is not good or bad, but free iron in the brain will kill you. Free copper in the brain will kill you. Copper deficiency, you'll end up with anemia. You'll end up with your hands will shake because your nerves, the insulation comes off your nerves. So we got to stop making molecules good or bad. You have to optimize your recipe. And that means you need to know what it is, what's going on inside you, so you can make intelligent choices about what to go after. And then you got to measure it to see if it's working or not. Because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And we don't know everything about everything. I guarantee you, in 20 years, they're going to look back and say, oh my God, they were using, non-selective chemotherapy for this cancer. Oh my God, they were giving people things that just kill cells willy-nilly, hoping the cancer cells that are fastest growing would consume the most of it and die. They're going to look back at a lot of things that we do now, and they're going to cringe. So, we think we have the state of the art. In 20 years, we will laugh at today's state of the art.
In 20 years, there'll be gene therapy and 3D organs and all these things that we think are futuristic. And now they're like, oh, what do we worry about that? Well, just here's go to the Costco and get your 3D liver and you're good to go. Things may change. We'll see. Sci-fi may become reality. But yeah, I think one point, you definitely get your biomarkers, definitely work either on your own or work with a doctor who or a health care provider who can tell you what markers to be looking at, what is important. And it's not just the thing with the health biomarkers. What my number is for my thyroid or whatever thyroid marker I'm looking at may not be the same it is for Dr. John. It goes on what your symptoms are, and it correlates with a couple other things as well. Your immune system, there's so many different pieces to this. We're not just cookie cutter. And like what again works for me is not going to work for Dr. John or my wife or somebody else. You want to work with somebody who has an individual plan. If somebody says, no, you're going to do these 22 supplements and do this and that, and you're going to be great, run fast the other way. That's my opinion.
Especially because they really believe it because they did it and it worked for them. They're like, oh my God, when we added eggs to this recipe, my cake came out so much better. So you got to do that. And yet in your recipe, it may not be a good ingredient, although generally I think eggs are pretty healthy for most people. But that's why it's so critical that you tune it to your situation. I just think I think that's huge, yeah.
No, the time has flown by here. We're winding up. So if you have one more tip for people, what would they, in terms of optimizing their health span, let me know what that would be. And then let everybody know where they can find you, learn all this, get more great information.
Sure.
I don't know if your programs are still open. I know we're having a wait list. So tell everybody about where they can find you, learn all about these great insights.
Sure. Thanks, Stanley. So there's a ton of other things I could tell you about, omega-3 versus omega-6 fats, or, how do you improve glucose disposal or whatever. One thing that's killing most Americans right now is excess fructose consumption. And you're like, wait a second, John, fructose, that's fruit sugar. That's got to be good for me. Fruit's good for me. And I think that's a huge problem right now. There are two researchers that I have a lot of respect for that have done some great work here. One of them is Dr. Richard Johnson, who has done a tremendous amount of research in this space, primarily in animals, but kind of unraveling this whole fructose thing. And in a nutshell, fructose is primarily metabolized in your liver. And when that wave of fructose hits your liver from the barbecue sauce or the sweetened iced tea or the low-fat yogurt, everything, all processed foods in general have a bunch of fructose in them because it's the cheapest way to sweeten things. And I have friends that are like, oh, John, I don't ever, eat that. I just use table sugar. I'm like, okay, table sugar is a disaccharide. It's half glucose and half fructose. So yeah, high fructose corn syrup, generally 55% fructose, 45% glucose. That's a bad actor. But table sugar is only 10% less bad. So that fructose from table sugar, or that fructose from fruit, or that fructose from barbecue sauce or ketchup or iced tea, it hits your liver. The liver, when it metabolizes it, it uses an enzyme called fructokinase. And it has to add a phosphate group to the fructose. And I'm going to grab, I have this from a talk I did a few weeks ago, but, here's my ATP molecule, so.
His own ATP molecule.
It starts, not to scale, as they say, it starts to yank phosphates off the ATP because you need a phosphate for every single fructose molecule. And what happens is, in a short time, you can wipe out half the ATP in your liver, which is a nightmare. It's like if somebody emptied half your bank account and now you don't have the money to pay the mortgage, you don't have the money to mow the lawn, you just don't have the currency to do what you need to do to stay healthy. So that's step one. Fructose knocks down. Now you have a bunch of ADP floating around in your cell now. What's going to happen? The body needs more ATP. So some of the ADP is going to steal a phosphate and it's to make ATP back. So you're going to end up with a whole bunch of what's called AMP, adenosine monophosphate. And when you have a lot of that in the cell, remember, this is your fully charged lithium battery, or now it's a discharged lithium battery. When you have low phosphate, which you're going to have because the fructose wiped out all the phosphate in your liver, the body turns on an enzyme to get rid of the AMP. And you, pardon my blunt words, you piss out all your lithium batteries. You metabolize this and you eliminate them. You urinate out what was your ATP, and that's the first thing, which is a nightmare. And you've also wiped out the ATP in the liver. That's a bad thing. But when you metabolize this, what do you make? The metabolic product is uric acid. And then uric acid goes out and tells your body, wow, it's the fall and we have to get ready before we hibernate. We're not going to have any food this winter. And so it says, turn down energy use, turn down fat burning, turn up fat production in the liver. All that fructose gets converted to fat and you end up with fatty liver disease. It causes your triglycerides to skyrocket. The uric acid raises your blood pressure, and some of that fat that the liver has to export into your blood ends up around your midsection. So you no longer have abs, you have a layer of visceral fat around your organs in your midsection. So I know for young people, it's like, oh my God, that's going to ruin my Instagram pictures. But
can't mess with it.
But in reality, that visceral fat is the most dangerous fat, because that's where you produce all these inflammatory cytokines, the IL-6, all these other things that can cause you a nightmare if you ever get sick. So I think that excess fructose consumption above 25 grams a day is killing Americans. And it's not just me. I mean, Dr. Johnson has shown this. He has a book that's called Nature Wants You to Be Fat. Great book. Get it on Audible. Dr. David Perlmutter wrote a book called Drop Acid, which is not a guide to Grateful Dead concerts. It is actually, how do you drop your uric acid levels? Another great book. I have tremendous respect for Dr. Perlmutter. In fact, had a chance to do a couple clubhouses with him, back in the day. So I think that excess fructose and excess omega-6 fats are killing people. And I wish every bag of processed food would have to say on it how many grams of fructose and how many grams of omega-6 fat is present in this package. And then people could say, I'm not eating that. I was telling, when I gave the talk, I said, I go to a Super Bowl party and I'm scanning all the food and I'm like, wow, there's 40 things here. I'm going to eat chicken wings because those are the least adulterated. I don't want to get overloaded with fructose and I don't want to get overloaded with omega-6 fats. So that would be the one I would leave it on, is you don't want non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You don't want high triglycerides. You don't want high blood pressure. You don't want fat around your middle, and fructose is driving all those things. It's never one thing. And a low level of fructose, the liver uses it. It makes some glycogen. Everybody's good. It's when I tell people, you have a pot on the stove. It can handle 25 grams of fructose. You fill it up, it boils down, everything's good. When you put in 50 grams, 25 grams of that sugar goes out and spills across the top of your stove and starts burning and smoking and spilling into your kitchen and onto the floor and making nasty smells and burnt garbage all over your stove. When you exceed your body's ability to deal with fructose, then you create metabolic nightmares. And I want to, again, acknowledge Dr. Richard Johnson and Dr. Perlmutter. They do a beautiful job articulating it. They'll show you 100 studies or 200 studies, but I want to make you aware of the research from Dr. Johnson and the book from both of these folks, because that is something that's killing us right now. And I know so many people, they're like, I'm afraid of fat. I eat low fat, low fat, low fat. Well, there's only protein, fat, and carbohydrate. That's it. So when you go low fat, normally those products are high carbohydrate and oftentimes high fructose. So you think you're doing something that's good, but in reality, it's really destroying your metabolism.
It's just
So
processed foods, no matter what it is not good for your pure, clean, organic food is the way to go. Yeah, I told uric acid, I think, has now become jumped up and become one of those important biomarkers to check. So where can people find you? Are you on social media much? Is it mostly through the website? Where can people check out the information that you provide?
yeah, I have a website that outlines my program. It's just my name, johnsottery.com. And I have a program where I teach people all the health moves that I'm doing. I try to give them enough of the science like we did today, where you get it, where you understand. Because for me, I have a hard time just saying, don't eat this, especially if it tastes good. But once I know how it works, and once I know how it ravages my metabolism, then I'm like, wow, I don't care how good they make that poison taste. It's easy for me to pass on it. And so, I try to teach people, here's why I think it's important. That's why I'm paying attention to it. And then I say, here's what I'm doing that is easy and generally relatively low cost. And then here are the watch outs. And here are the biomarkers that you might want to look at to see if this approach is working for you or not. Another big problem in the world, Neil, is that there's about a 20-year gap between the clinical discovery, the discovery in terms of the research, and then when it actually becomes common practice in medicine. And you know that because you operate you look at the research and you're sharing things with people now that maybe it's going to be 15 years before they will hear about it from someone else. So and the reason for that, it's not evil. It's just that science happens. Let's say in 1990, a bunch of science happens. And then in 1994, people start writing review articles on it. And then in 1998, they revise a medical textbook. And then they say, okay, we're going to start bringing in some of these things about fructose and uric acid and NRF2 and so on. And then eventually, a couple of years later, a new medical textbook comes out. And then the person goes to medical school and they're there for 4 years. And then they have to do their rounds and so on. So there's this 20-year lag between when the discovery happens and when it becomes common in clinical practice for biomarkers and in terms of the knowledge. And so I'm trying to live in that gap and say, let me find the gems from the scientific literature. Let me understand them. Let me vet them. Let me make sure that they are real. And then how can I take that knowledge and put it to work so that, I'm 63, I'll be 64 next year. But, I want to, when I get up, I want to be able to, I don't want to have any fat on my midsection. I want to be solid. I want to be able to go on a backpacking trip, with people that are 20, 30, and 40 and go through the North Carolina mountains. And I want to be one of the 2 or 3 people that doesn't get tired, that doesn't have any issue hiking up a mountain with 38 or 40 pounds on my back. I refuse to surrender to aging normally. And I want to share with you guys what I'm doing. So you can find me at johnsottery.com. So both of my parents are no longer here. And my mother was a 3-time cancer survivor who didn't survive her last bout with cancer, but she made it to 82, which I was very thankful of and grateful for. My father, I coached him the whole time. He made it to age 90, and he lived at home and he was sharp until the end. But he had chronic disease for the last 30 years of his life. He had Parkinson's disease. He had type 2 diabetes. He had extra weight. I wish I could have saved both of them. They're both gone, but I can help save you guys. I can help you spot the iceberg years before you hit it. and then make those slight metabolic course changes so you never hit it. Because once you have a 7-centimeter tumor on your lung, once you have a tumor in your colon or in your prostate or in your breast, I'm glad we have treatment options, but I know from my mother's experience that the treatment options are oftentimes brutal. She had lymphedema for the last 25 years of her life because they had to take out her lymph nodes by surgery. She had radiation multiple times. She had massive side effects from the radiation. She went through multiple rounds of chemo, and she had massive side effects from the chemo. So the trick with cancer is to prevent it as much as humanly possible. And yet that's not the focus in the world right now. I want to mention for the male viewers that gamma tocopherol or mixed natural tocopherols seems to be highly protective against prostate cancer. There was work done at Johns Hopkins, I want to say around 2001, and the guys in the top fifth versus the bottom fifth, they didn't see a 50% reduction in prostate cancer. The people in the top fifth versus the bottom fifth had a 5-fold reduction in prostate cancer over the next 10 years. And we won't get into the mechanistic reasons and like that. But a lot of people, when they supplement with vitamin E, they take alpha tocopherol, which is one of 8 vitamin E molecules. And it turns out that the gamma and the delta are the ones that have this beneficial anti-cancer effect. And so if you take too much of alpha tocopherol, the body will turn on the genes in the cell to get rid of all the tocopherols. And the US government did a study, I want to say around 2011. I have to go back and look, maybe earlier than that. No, actually, I think it finished in 2011. But they gave people 400 international units of racemic alpha tocopherol, so D, L. And they said, okay, what's this going to do? Is this going to prevent prostate cancer? Not only did it not prevent prostate cancer, but that synthetic mixture of the D and L form of alpha tocopherol actually increased prostate cancer by 22%, and it was statistically significant. And when I look at their study, in table number 1, you can see 6 months into the study, and this was a 10-year study, they had cut the gamma tocopherol level of all the patients in half by loading them up with synthetic alpha tocopherol. The body turned on the genes to get rid of it and got rid of the good gamma tocopherol and likely the delta, but they didn't measure it. And they actually ended up with more prostate cancer. So I call racemic alpha tocopherol the rat. And I try to teach people, how do you avoid the rat? In many processed foods, the formulators are not biochemists. They don't know any better. And when pure mixed natural tocopherols cost this much and racemic alpha tocopherol costs this much, which one do you think they're going to use in their almond milk or their coconut milk or their other products? So you don't want to take racemic alpha tocopherol, the D, L form, so David, Larry. You don't want to take it as a supplement, and you don't want to take it in any manufactured food that you get, because it not only doesn't help you, it actually has negative health things. So I have a video on YouTube called "The Supplement Mistake That Millions of People Make Every Day," that increases the risk of cancer, and it's free. And I also have another video that I just did a Facebook Live, and I pushed it up on YouTube, and it's now been watched like 1.4 million minutes. And it's how to avoid calcifying your arteries. And it's all about vitamin K2, which, Neil, I know you're a fan of. I am too. If you end up calcifying your arteries, your risk of dying from heart disease goes up massively. The elasticity of the arterial wall goes down. It's a nightmare. And most Americans don't get enough K2. and it's so new that it's in, only only a tiny fraction of supplements, but it's a ton of it is in natto. Number one food source in the world for vitamin K2 is natto. So
There you go.
another,
It's all about the food. Great info. I totally love vitamin K2. Give it to a lot of my heart patients and preventative patients. Thanks, Dr. John, for hopping on. All the information that Dr. John presented will be in the show notes. We'll put a link to his website so you can check him out and check out his YouTube. And stay tuned for another episode of Life Optimized coming soon.